Okay, so hi, my name's Allison Kristoff. I'll be moderating this paper session today. We've got about 5 minutes until we get started here, but go ahead and make sure that everybody's ready to go for us. We're going to start out with Derek Demeter, Choose Your Own Planetarium Experience. And we'll get going here in just about 5 minutes. Again, reminder of the rules, 10 minutes for your presentation. I'll give you a 2-minute warning, and then 2 minutes for questions afterward, and then 3 to change over. Also, a reminder for all the presenters, if there are questions afterward, try to remember to repeat the question into the microphone so that we can get it clearly on the video as well for the playback. About to get started. Just for those of you who just really came in, first presenter today, Derek Demeter, the paper being Choose Your Own Planetarium Experience. We'll go ahead and get started here in just the next minute. Sorry. Just give people a chance to get here just in case they're running a little behind.
All right, there we go. I mean, that's a lot louder. Excellent. So, anyways, we have basically at the planetarium, we've been doing several different types of shows that utilize this idea of choosing your own adventure. Now, how many of you remember these kind of books? Yes. I used to love these as a kid, the idea that you could literally make your protagonist decide where to go. You can either bring that person to their doom or save the world or neither. Who knows? And that's the thing that I really loved about this, is that you really chose the kind of pathway of the experience. And again, we love doing live interactive programming. So Mike and I were discussing the idea that, how can we make this truly interactive? How can we get the audience to go, hey, I am in control of the show? Well, we decided to create these kind of choose your own adventure shows where the audience gets to choose the pathway of the show. And trying to talk about this in about 10 minutes is difficult, but of course that's where the proceedings come in. But essentially, what we use in order to steer the show, if you will, is we use basically these classroom clickers that are made from Turning Technologies, or Turning Solutions. And essentially they hook up to a USB to a laptop, and you can actually chain as many of these clickers as you want. And essentially, the audience gets to, using the alphanumeric pad, or the numeric pad there, you get to choose how the show actually goes on. We call it basically the Planetarium Response System, or PRS. We're still trying to figure out a better acronym for that, but it works for right now. And again, what we do is we essentially go through this and have the audience choose it. Now, of course, we let these things rain. I mean, look at it. There we go. We've had a fun photo shoot with this, but essentially, just to give you an idea, we use all of these. And what we decided to do with the clickers is actually give them some individualization. We actually gave them astronomer names. So, for example, when we were handing these out at the beginning of the show, we would say, "Oh, you're a Edwin Hubble," or "You're a Carolyn Herschel," or a Henrietta Leavitt. I mean, again, or Ibn al-Haytham. And people were like, what was that? I don't want to be Ibn al-Haytham. But he was one of the most famous astronomers of all time. But people know, but nobody talks about this guy. But anyways, our most important astronomer, I should say. And so you kind of get to learn some interesting experiences as well. Get to learn some interesting facts about Hubble or Tyson or Carl Sagan or whatever. And people start going, I want to be Hubble. No, I want. And so it's just people are having fun with it even as they're entering the planetarium. So basically, there's us right there holding. It almost looks like we're holding cards or whatever. But there's one of the members of the audience actually utilizing the clicker system. So again, they hold these clickers while they watch the show. They look up in the dome, and that's pretty much it. It's a very simple, elegant system. So our first show that we created with this system is this idea called How Do We Know? So my brother and I had this talk about the idea of, he always asks me, he's like, Derek, how do we know these things? How do you know that the speed of light is this? And how do you know that there's dark matter? How do you know these things? And I was like, that would make a great show, right? Yeah, it'd make a great show. So Mike and I started talking about this, and what we did is we decided to do a social media release and other things about asking people what questions they want asked. So we created hundreds of questions, basically, and what we do is at each show, we present 10 questions. The one thing about this is that each show is different. So if you come to one show and then come back, there will be a whole other list of questions. So this creates that solution for repeatability. The idea, how do you get people back into your planetarium, right? So this really helped with that. But also, it gives a chance for the audience to see what's going to come up. And they get to choose the top 5 questions that we'll answer in that show. So it took a lot of production to make the show because we had hundreds of questions. But the nice thing about the system that we run, which is primarily UniView, is that we do everything kind of on the fly. So we looked at our database and see what we had available. We bugged Dantel for items as well. But basically what we did is we created this kind of streamlined idea of, okay, well, we know that if somebody asks this question, we'll be able to actually talk about it. And instead of going, okay, all right, well, we don't have anything for that question. No, we made sure to have everything prepared. And essentially, the audience gets to steer the direction of the show. And essentially how it works is, what we do is we put up a slide. It says, how do we know? And then we have these questions like, the universe is expanding and accelerating, that black holes exist, the origin of the moon, what makes stars shine, an asteroid hit the Earth more than 65 million years ago, the shape of Milky Way, life could exist on other worlds, exoplanets, dark matter, etc. And so then again, they get to vote for their questions. So what we do is then we ask them to use their clickers, and then they do a poll. So here we have this little like timer that we made, and it goes through 30 seconds. So they put in their responses. The nice thing about this is it integrates into PowerPoint. So all we have to do is then have the results, and then we see this. And so obviously, 21 of the people voted for that the universe is expanding and accelerating. So then we go ahead and talk about that one. Then when we bring the slide back up again, we eliminate number 1. We have the ability to do that, where we can actually go into the slide while we talk about it and eliminate that from there, so that way people don't vote for that again. So it actually becomes very streamlined. It becomes a lot of fun, and it's a little bit of work for the presenter. I mean, you have to run back and do this and that, but it's a lot of fun. It keeps you on your toes. And again, the audience gets to kind of steer the course of the show. They have an investment into the show, which is really, really cool. Let's talk about some data, or in this case, data. The nice thing about this is we found out that people really enjoy these shows, but of course the end result of this is also to be used for our K-12 programming, to learn and to understand the assessment of our students. You know, when they come to the planetarium, we can actually do something like this. They can also maybe steer the show as well, but also to get to understand what's going on with the progress of our students in our K-12. Actually, all of our shows, K-12 shows, are customized and designed to meet the Sunshine State standards. Each individual grade has their own set of shows, and being able to use this, we can get a better understanding of what's going on with them. Kind of what else we did with this, we actually created a Choose Your Own Adventure interplanetary cruise line called Stellaris. And our first version of this was Protocol Mars. And Protocol Mars basically talked about your tour guide to Mars. So essentially, imagine you're on a cruise line, you go on one of these shore excursions, right? And so the idea is that you had a cruise director, and so I was the cruise director there with the Martian outfit. I try to make it, it's just ridiculous. If anyone's been on a cruise, knows how ridiculous it is. And then Mike's our pilot. So Pilot Mike, as he was called. That's it. And I think, do you remember, what was I called again? Do you know? I was like I was a cruise director, Dean something, I don't know, whatever. Either way, I was called something really ridiculous because that's what you have to do. And essentially what we did is we did a tour around Mars. And the nice thing about it is that we had say, okay, well, we're going to visit on Mars today. We want to visit Olympus Mons, we want to visit Valles Marineris, Gale Crater, etc. And the audience gets to choose their destinations. But the nice thing is that if you come back to the next weekend show of Protocol Mars, we'll have a new group of destinations. So again, that plays on the idea that come back next week or come back the next couple weeks, and you'll get to visit other places on Mars. So again, it draws that whole need for repeatability. And right now, we're currently working on a show. We talked about this at LIPS on a Oregon Trail style show to Mars or to a place in space, where basically you get to learn the many ways you're going to die in space, basically. We're really excited about that, and we're excited to use this technology more and to keep creating Choose Your Own Adventure planetarium programs. So thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them. Yes?
How long do your shows typically last?
Our shows last about an hour long, so that's a decent amount we find. But sometimes, the first time we did How Do We Know, it went on for like 2 hours because it was just insane. But what we also do, too, is that at the very end, if we don't answer when somebody asked me last year, what happens if none of the questions they want answered? What we do is we say, okay, we have one shot for one more question. Is there any free-for-alls in there? And then that gives a chance for people to be like, oh, yeah, I really wanted that question answered. Or, and we have discussion about it. So we kind of, have a little bit of wiggle room at the end to kind of, if there was one question that somebody really want answered, we can actually do that.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay.
Was this show like the same cost as a like any other show, or was it the kind of thing where it was like a special event kind of experience?
The cost of the show was the same as any other show. We were just trying to find interesting ways to A, do something fun, but B, to make it more interactive. And so, but yeah, it's the same price as any other show. All right. Oh, Dan.
Do you have any issues with audience disappointment if things don't go the way some of them expect or want?
Not at all. We haven't had a single disappointment in the show. In fact, actually, people were like, "That was really, really cool," and in fact, we had many people come back. We saw a lot of people come back. They're like, "I want to know what the next questions are going to be," and so it definitely seemed like we never had anyone like, "Oh, you didn't answer my question," and so we didn't have that problem.
I have another question kind of related to my last question. So how often did you do this experience?
So we do public shows Friday and Saturday nights. So we did this for about a month and a half or so, each Saturday night as our special feature. Usually Saturday nights are what we do, our special features. Usually Friday nights are Night Sky Tour, and then Saturday is our special feature. And we did that for about a month and a half or so. And then the same thing with Port of Call Mars. We usually keep our shows about a month going, and then we kind of turn it around because then it gets a little, stale after that. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Derek. We
Thank you.
appreciate it. Next up, we have Emily Hormy. I'd say that right? Hormy, excuse me. With Concerts Under the Stars. And since we are doing concurrent sessions, we will wait right until 9:15 in case we have any switch over between the two rooms.
Let them see my notes.
There we go.
How many? I still have a minute.
Okay, Concerts Under the Stars. Whenever you're ready.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Today I'm going to talk to you about a live music series that we launched earlier this year. And, like what we did right, what we did wrong, what we learned, various things that went into planning the series, challenges we ran into, and our plans for the future. So where's my mouse? Okay, there it is. While live music and really alternative programming generally isn't exactly new, it's still kind of a novel thing that not everybody is doing in their domes. And this particular series has kind of been in the back of my mind since I've worked in my dome. I like shows, I like live music, it's kind of a hobby of mine, so it's always been something that I've wanted to do. And if you read my actual paper, there's a bunch more history about this, but we don't have time for that. But anyway, so it didn't really materialize until about a year and a half ago, which was the result of a lot of convenient things falling into place. But like I said, just read the proceedings for that. So after a few months of kind of organizing and planning and getting in touch with musicians and experimenting and figuring out just how it would work, the series was announced about a month before the first show. The first show was in January, and over the next 4 months, we had one show per month until April. So, table of contents. Since it was the first year we were doing this, we were really concerned kind of about acoustics, how it would sound, because it's such a different thing that we've not done before. So we tried generally to limit the size of the ensemble, and also we had to consider kind of our layout. So a big concern was the placement of our left and right speakers and the stage area and feedback. And really everybody that we consulted with on planning this, it was like unanimous that we needed to get the sound right, which is something that alternative music venues don't often do because they are not used to being a music venue. They are used to being whatever they actually are. So we are fortunate enough to have a sound tech who happens to be running AV in this room, John. And we did get the sound right. It sounded absolutely fantastic. And we heard that feedback from like audiences and musicians alike. So really, despite our initial concerns, we did pull it off. They sounded great. And thank you, John, for really making that happen. So all of our performers were local musicians. And that kind of ended up being an overarching theme throughout the series. Grand Rapids people really like Grand Rapids, so they get really excited about like their city. And local connections are really important. I think working with community is a fantastic thing inherently, so really involving them in your institution is important. And I am fortunate enough to know a lot of our local musicians. So, you know, finding people to perform was not a difficult task. The format of the shows was that each band had an hour for the performance, so they put together a set to fit in that amount of time. And there they are. Just, you know, visuals. All visuals were mixed live by a video artist named Nate Eisenga. He is a person that I met kind of in the process of coming up with this idea. I met him through some of the musicians I know, actually, and it kind of just seemed right. So his kind of process for working was that he seeks out video from royalty-free places and just kind of has this library of visuals that he can choose from. And he actually had to adapt his workflow quite a bit because he's not worked in Full Dome before, as most non-planetarium artists have not. So he kind of had to figure out what of his existing content would work. So things that are really abstract, geometric kind of stuff that even if you're projecting it onto a dome without warping it will still look good. So, and I also worked alongside him to alter some of the content that didn't work that well. For instance, repeating it like around the ring, or just projecting the video kind of like at one point in the dome, etc. So he also utilized a lot of content from the ESO Full Dome archive. And he just plugged right into our input HDMI. And so it wasn't 4K, which if we could improve upon that in the future, that would be great, but it still looked really great, even though it wasn't 4K. And then he mixes the visuals live with a controller, and that really makes for kind of a unique, spontaneous show. Even though it was rehearsed, he rehearsed with all of the musicians leading up to each show, but really like catered to their musical style. Lighting is kind of an issue in the planetarium, as many of you probably know. Trying not to flood the dome, but still be able to see the performers and make sure that the performers can see what they're doing. So the lighting that we used was very cheap and very homemade. It was just an LED flashlight that cost like $5 each. I made a cone of paper, and then we put in like gels and such to make them red. So we actually had 2 red and 2 white lights, and then they were just clipped on a mic stand. So that cone helped direct the light downward, and it didn't cast light onto the dome very much. We also utilized our spotlight for one of the shows. They just had a vocalist for one song, so we just used it sparingly but to great effect. And then we also used our cove lights for one of the shows, but this was actually used as more of a visual effect rather than a utilitarian lighting. But this was kind of cool. We put together some effects that the musician could actually control using his equipment. So that was interesting as well. Photography is another tricky thing in the planetarium in particular. It's a combination of darkness, quickly moving visuals on the dome, but also now the added complication of a live performer. So this was something that I kind of had to learn because I was not a photographer. I've taken pictures. That's about the extent of my photography experience before this. So an unexpected outcome of the series was that I actually got kind of good at capturing these shows. So I have just like a few examples of some images that I took and the camera settings. And if anyone wants to chat about this afterward, this could be a workshop in its own. So there's no time, but I would be happy to talk to anybody if you have questions about photography in the planetarium. For various reasons, there was no money set aside for this series. That said, all media related to this project was earned media, so social media, word of mouth. Some media outlets actually sought out museum employees and musicians once they heard about it, but we didn't actually deliberately do any printed media or anything like that. The posters, each show had its own poster. They were designed by a local art student, so again, local connection. And he actually just approached our marketing department asking if we had a project that he could do for a class. So it worked out really well. Whoops. Price structure, you can see here. We didn't have any sold the day of, so that price was really not relevant because every show sold out in advance. So our audiences are usually pretty balanced between members and non-members. You can see that it's generally more members for the most part. So these are actually the numbers the weekend after each show that we did. The April one was during spring break, which is why it's kind of high, but it's still a good representation of kind of the ratio of members to non-members. So of course, the intent of this series, as alternative events generally intend to be, is to attract new audiences with a new program. So kind of the initiative in our museum in general is to find interesting ways to appeal to people who aren't necessarily families with kids. And that worked. These shows attracted basically non-members primarily. And across the board, it was totally different than any of our regular programs. And we had some repeat visitors. One is my best friend, but that is beside the point. I'd also like to add that over the course of the series, other goals kind of arose. So aside from attracting new visitors to the planetarium and museum, we wanted people who attended just because it was an event, we wanted them to leave as fans of the music. And the musicians themselves in Grand Rapids also became an audience, many of them trying to get to play in the planetarium, contacting me on Facebook, asking how they can get in on this. And then lastly, an outcome was just that we challenged ourselves. We did something new and learned a lot from it. So in 2018, we plan to extend the series by one show. So it'll still be a winter-spring series, January to April, but we will have 5 shows. And I actually have a meeting scheduled for this basically right when I get back to work from this conference. So more to come. Thank you.
I return the question to you now. What, as far as your artists in the Dome, how much of the proceeds do they get from the ticket sales? And what's the ratio of that? Because we do some stuff that's similar to that, but we wanted to get an idea of what you do.
Yeah, so because we didn't have money set aside, we actually came up with just a fixed amount based on the number of performers in the ensemble. So this coming year, we are actually planning to pay them more because we have planned for it. But they did get some amount of money. It was not a percentage of what we made off the shows, but we basically just found money in our budget that we could give them. So it was, I think for a one-person ensemble, it was $125, and then we added $50 per person. And then this year, actually accounting for like rehearsal time and all of that, we are going to pay each performer $300.
I think that's about all the time we have for questions. Unfortunately, I know there are quite a few today, so if you can find Emily after the fact.
Please find me, read the whole paper. It's really long. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you again. So coming up next, we have Carol Holmberg, and with Harry Potter Science Saturday. So we'll get her set up here, and then we'll get rolling right at 9:30.
Well, my name is Carol Holmberg, and Harry Potter Science Saturday was arguably the most successful event we ever had, which was really shocking. I told them I'd like to see 100 people there, and we ended up with over 1,500 the first year. And, yeah, we only seat 55. And 1,000 the second year. We just, and it was Facebook advertising only. We had no money. I was just looking for something that was different and unique. And years ago, I saw on Jane Houston Jones' blog about Harry Potter objects. And she's the one who does the What's Up in the Night Sky for NASA. And back when people were blogging before Facebook, or whenever I had seen this about the Harry Potter objects, and this is actually, and it's, you know, the proceedings are written down, so you don't have to write down the link, but it still has all of the objects. And then also years ago, I roomed with April Witt, who admitted, even though this Harry Potter thing that was about 800 pages was her daughter's, she could not put it down. And that was all before the movies, and it really made me think about at the Harry Potter objects. Well, there's a lot of them, and it's amazing to me, who's only watched one movie and never had the patience for an 800-page book. When are they going to do the Cliff Notes? That there's all of these characters that are named, and since we are the Carolinas, we really needed to focus on objects that were visible in the Carolinas, and I came up with the top 12. Sirius Blacks, Bellatrix Lestrange, Merope, which I still can't pronounce. I'd ask an audience, who is this? And if somebody said it and pronounced it some way, I'd go, that's right. And I just repeat their pronunciation, Merope, whatever. Phoenix. Now, Ada Argus is, for Argus Filch, Ada Argus is what they call Ada Carine, or used to, because of Argo Novice. But I left that in, and kids love screaming Filch. And for our evaluation afterwards, somebody wrote, I had no idea there was a star named Filch. So, I don't know. But, you can see them, Elfard, Hydra. The two that gave me the most grief were Merope, because Merope was cut from the movies, so we didn't have an image to show. Instead, I used an image from a fan site right off the web, and little Draco Malfoy, whose face was hidden in the movies, so I used an outtake. I was very, very nervous about that, and because it was so successful, we hired from out of city an IP lawyer, an intellectual property lawyer, because that's everyone's number one question. How did you get away with this? And the IP lawyer came, and we paid him a huge amount of money, and he said, all fine. I showed him exactly the visuals. I gave him the script. Everything was fine. We're using only small things. There's a scientific counterpart for everything. And if anything, we're increasing the fan base. And so he gave his approval for everything except a few of the food items. So I feel very strongly in presenting this and telling people and encouraging them to do. And he said if anybody had any questions, well, not to consult him, but instead talk to our county attorney. We are Museum of York County. We are owned by the county of York County, South Carolina, and but he was there in the meetings, and he's the point of contact. So if you do have any questions, I would say bug him, although it takes him over a year to respond to anything. Okay, so besides the planetarium, which to me was the heart of it, even though less than a third of the people attending could actually see a show, I gave 20-minute shows over and over and over again, showing the pictures and the 12 objects and having people guess. It was the last day of our owl exhibit, so we had a PhD stand there explaining why an owl couldn't deliver the mail. He was very exasperated. Well, of course. How in the world would they know where to deliver it? They can't read. But he also explained how the little talons can grip packages, stringed packages, but not letters. All right. And we were worried about copyright for the houses and didn't use the word Hogwarts. So we made up 4 houses of our own and had a guest book, and people got stamps so they could get their owl certificate. The Sneetch, the thing that's used in Quidditch, I guess that used to be in the Harry Potter world an endangered animal, because people were using it a lot in Quidditch. So we actually talked about endangered animals. We had an American bison. Next year we're going to have a red wolf. So we talk about local endangered animals and use the Harry Potter world in Quidditch to kind of hit that home. The Imperious Curse was something that caused people to bend to another's will. We did, I'm not really fond of this, but we did parasites, worms of some sort that controlled their host and caused them to do unexpected things. So there's a young person very involved in learning because of Harry Potter in his little Harry Potter outfit. And okay, this one was the most stretch of all. They have the the beans of various flavors. We got those chemical taste strips that taste different to everybody. People love learning about themselves and how your palate worked and how different animals can't taste different things. And oh my goodness, because of the unexpected crowd, people were getting like little bits of taste strip, like a third or a fourth to taste, and really scary. People were giving them to their infants. I mean, we had to stop that because they want, the infant can't even vocalize what they can taste, right? And this is, we had some guy dress up as Dumbledore. This is the first year. He's going to go less Gandalf with his hat, he says. He's got it. But people loved having their picture with it. And since very many people couldn't see the planetarium show, they didn't get that stamp, so he just waved his magic wand and told them that they were a wizard anyway. And people just loved it. Here they are dressed up. Little kid is Mad-Eyed Moody with Dumbledore and lots of things. And we had our crowd was controlled with all these people like wrapped around the building by, we had our store manager hang out as Hagrid. And he wore flip-flops that were glued together to make him tall. And people loved that too. He's smiling, but those shoes gave him blisters. We tried really hard to get a local Quidditch team, but they flaked on us two years in a row. So we made a little croquet game where you can see she's riding her little broom. And, just let the kids burn up steam. We had crafts. Here's some owl crafts left over from our owl exhibit. People had picture taking, which they liked as well. The county bus came, the bookmobile. And they put a face on their bus, something to do with Harry Potter, and had them make wands. And, besides the huge amount of money that we made with admissions, we sold beverages. The IP lawyer said that butterbeer is fine because it's on the Food Network, no longer copyrighted. We went crazy with the butterbeer. 2 minutes? And Wendy there, she took sticks from our backyard trails and she sprayed glow-in-the-dark paint on them and sold them as glow-in-the-dark wands for $1 each. Sold out of the sticks. I mean, these are people that really want to buy stuff. So, we had somebody make scarves, but we had the jelly beans. That was one thing the artist said they couldn't, or the lawyer said they can't be Bertie Bott's beans, so we rebranded them. And the chocolate frogs, which are just chocolate molded frogs, they were in the little boxes with wizard cards. He had problems with that. We had to make our own cards, but we still have the little 5 or 6-sided boxes. And people were just buying them for keepsakes. It's amazing how much money we made from it. It's a buying crowd. So this past year, we extended the hours. We jacked up the price by $3 a person, and we still had 1,000 people at our museum. And marketing, in retrospect, they say, it's because I attached to a franchise. But there's nothing else that fits as well. And if you look at the character names, they really were named after stars and constellations for the most part. Some might not be, really a stretch, Ada Argus, Argus Filch, but Bellatrix, which means female warrior, Alphard, which means the solitary one, really a strong argument that she did that on purpose, and people were just amazed by that revelation. And that's really all I've got to say. So.
Fantastic.
I just want to corroborate what you said. We recently sold out 5 shows of 400 over the course of a couple of weeks doing Harry Potter stuff. And we were also able to do a bunch of chemistry-based stuff under the guise of potions. And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it really works well, and I had no idea.
This is perhaps dated information, but we did something maybe as long ago as 2009, and there was a website where you could see what the intellectual property license was. It itemized it fully, and I believe there was even a sheet you'd sign and tear off and send in to whoever their licensing agent was as permission. This was some
Well,
years
that
ago.
would have saved us hundreds of dollars in retrospect.
Yeah, so it was all on the website back in 2009 at least, and it may be still there somewhere.
We've been doing a Skies Over Hogwarts show for about 10 years. In fact, we're doing it again in November for 2 weekends. And it's always really, really popular. We did not ask permission first, but then Warner Brothers found out about us, and I got a letter from their lawyers, which basically said, go for it. As long as you're not changing things, you're not making the characters do weird stuff, the price is a family-friendly price point, they were okay with what we were doing. So that was great.
Yeah, that's good, and because you hear about J.K. Rowling being very litigious, and or whatever the word is, yeah, that's just not the case here.
Well, I'm sorry, we'll do take more questions afterward if you want to find Carol again. Thank you so much again for presenting. And our last presenter today is going to be Jim Greenhouse on tips and tricks for space science events. We'll give him some time to switch over here and also wait and make sure anyone coming over from the other side is able to join us as well. So we've got another couple minutes.
Sorry, I'm not going to sing for you like John Bell. I will just give you a little preview and say that whenever I'm done, in addition to taking questions, if you have any additional things that you've used during events that you'd like to add, or if you haven't had the same experiences that I've had, I'd like to hear about that as well at the end.
I also want to mention this session has one less speaker than the other session. So we're trying to keep it on time so that people can go back and forth. But at the very end, if the speaker from the previous sessions are still in the room, we can have some questions and things too, probably.
Ready to go? So I'm going to get through these so we'll have some time at the end. So these are just some things that I have noticed over the years that helped us out when we're having special events at various different places that I've worked. So I'm going to start off with publicity. Whenever you're preparing publicity, don't forget to use the journalistic basics, which are who, what, when, where, why, and how. And if you're wondering how some of those work in, the how might be the cost of admission. That's usually how I think of it. And the who would be your planetarium or institution. That might also be the where. And if you're doing an off-site event, make sure, how many of you, your facility that you work for has multiple campuses? Okay, a few of you do. So make sure that if you're doing it someplace besides where your planetarium normally is, that you make that pretty clear, because you don't want people showing up at your planetarium when they're supposed to be somewhere else. Be specific as you can. So how many of you have publications that are printed for your institution? Okay, you know the deadline for that is like way far in advance, right? So put as much information as you can into your publications as far in advance as possible. And then the nice thing, now that listings are becoming more digital, you can go back and update them whenever you find out more things about your events. On social media, make sure on Facebook and so forth that you post several times. You know, it's an unlimited number of times that you can post. So just remember that the way Facebook works, if you post more than once a day, that actually decreases your reach. So don't, you know, go crazy with the post. But if you start far enough in advance, you can make multiple posts, and that's more effective. And then when you're working with your local media, if you can make friends with a reporter, that is the best thing you can do, because they will eventually start calling you for information. So you don't have to contact them necessarily, but be proactive source for all things related to astronomy. And if you're doing an interview, like an on-camera or video interview, make sure you bring plenty of props and visuals and everything, just like you do when you're preparing a planetarium show. Don't just be a talking head. And if you're doing an event that's targeted at audience, be sure to tell them what the targeted audience is. Also, so this is 2017. I actually came up with a schedule for the night events that we were doing for the entire year. So I kept telling people, if you want to know what's coming up, when you can come to the planetarium and look, go to the observatory and look through the telescope, make sure you go to our website. I had a really hard time getting the staff to actually do this, but I think the public liked it pretty well, because the staff kept going, I didn't know about that. And I was like, it's on the website. Everybody can see it. Content. So if you're participating in a widespread, like a worldwide event or a national event or something like that, lots of times they will provide content on the event's website for you. So that makes your life a lot easier, and NASA's really good about doing this through the Museum Alliance and Night Sky Network. And videos are one of my pet peeves, because sometimes, like NASA TV, if everybody in the world is trying to watch NASA TV, what happens? NASA TV stops working. So fortunately, in the last few years, they've come up with a couple of alternatives. There's also a Ustream channel that they have, and there's been a couple of events that they've done recently where they were on Facebook Live too. So, and Facebook can handle a whole bunch of people at once. And of course, if it's a pre-recorded, that's for live broadcast. If it's a pre-recorded thing, you can download it. How many of you recognize this? I lived on this website for a while. All right, so if you're new at an institution, you can do some experiments to see which days of the week work best in your area, because weekends might not always be the best time. Weekends are not the best time in Albuquerque, I found out. This is going to sound a little bonkers, but I want you to think about it. So what the thing was is that we've got these eager beaver people that like to show up like 30 minutes to an hour early, and they want instant gratification, right? So they want to see whatever it is in the sky, and you're still setting up, and you like, okay, just wait a few minutes and you can see it, and they're like right there while you're trying to set your telescope up or whatever. So to address this issue, what I normally do is advertise the start of the event for a few minutes after it, whatever is happening begins. Now notice I say I advertise that time. I'm usually set up well in advance so that when those people show up, we can do something with them. But and I like the enthusiasm when people show up early and really want to see something. So I don't want to do anything to dampen that. But I also need to be sure that I can give these people something when they come. And also whenever I plan for an event, I advertise the conclusion to be a few minutes before the astronomical event ends, so that when people show up at the last minute, they might still be able to see something. Check community calendars, see what your competition is. There's been a few times where I've noticed that something big is happening in the community on the same night where I want to do something, and I just call that event, and they're like, bring your telescope on over, and then it's an outreach event. How many of you have been caught observing on a field when the sprinklers came on? Yeah, okay. You know what I'm talking about there. So this is just a poster from something in 2014. We had a lunar and solar eclipse pretty close together. They just happened to be at the same time, only AM and PM, which was kind of funny. But notice that in my advertisements that I put the times for, the starting time for totality and when the mid-eclipse was, but I did not say when the event actually began and ended, because I wanted them to look at the advertised time for the event start and not worry so much about when the actual event was visible. So consider the psychological effect of offering events for free, because what happens when you offer things for free, people don't think they're as valuable sometimes. And I'll give you an example of that here in just a little bit. Something that I had to learn the hard way is that when you're trying to figure out what your total budget for an event is, if you are going to charge admission, consider that you may have to actually have a paid employee to do that, because they may have to be bonded, and have a background check, so you may not want to volunteer to do that. So factor that into your budget. I found that actually a more effective strategy a lot of times is just to offer admission by donation, and that seems to work out, just have donation boxes out, and that seems to work pretty well. And sometimes if you get like astronauts or something, you have a speaker that you cannot charge admission just to hear them, but check with them in advance and make sure that you can still charge museum or planetarium admission and just include their talk with your normal admission fee. So this is an example of, we had a dollar science night, big bang for a buck, and the museum, since it's a state museum, is actually free on the first Sunday of every month, and we usually have around 1,000 people or something like that. Look at this line around the waiting. This is for dollar science night, so we actually had almost 2,000 people that night. So we actually had more people that were more excited about coming to the museum to pay $1 than when we were free. And then we have these $5 First Fridays too, which seem to work out pretty well. Our normal museum admission is $8. All right. So if it's possible, don't assign a specific job to yourself. It's a pretty big event, because you may have to go around and relieve people for breaks and address issues. If possible, schedule more than one person for the total number of jobs that you have, and then you've got that extra person that can relieve others. And if you're getting activities from a website, it's actually kind of a good idea to share those websites with everybody that's working the event in advance, and then they can actually go and look at those events and they'll know exactly what to do. And you might even be able to have a training session in advance there. So there's some, these are some examples of finding hidden talent also in the museum. So Amanda up there actually works in admissions, but she can also make balloon doggies, and that turned out to be a really popular activity. There's Muriel, who's at the conference right there, and she's helping out with a fractal event. There she is right there. And then we had, I guess I got a laser pointer I could use. There's our local library. There's the Institute for Meteoritics. There's, I forget who that is. So, remember to partner with the talent on your staff and local people in your area, your local experts, your local nice people that are going to help you out. So for reoccurring events, you might prepare a Go box or something like that that has supplies that you know you're going to need every time, or something that might be helpful, and then you can add to it as you learn other things. And I probably don't need to tell you all this, but even if you prepared a planetarium show, if this is an annual event or monthly event or whatever, make sure that you run through the show before you actually present it, because, weird things happen whenever you don't run a show for a while. So this is for anybody who's new to an institution. I've had this experience a few times where we've actually had people come to me and say, oh, if you do this event, the billion people will come and it'll be great. Don't dismiss them, because they may have a point, but if you can check admission records, that'll, try to verify what they're saying. And if you are going to bring it back, start off small. So check with other institutions that are similar to yours and see how the event went for them. And I wanted to, during the last part, I just wanted something pretty for you to look at, so there's something pretty for you to look at. Have any of you seen this image before? Anywhere? You may have actually seen it. I forgot to bring this up here with me. But it was actually on the front cover of Discover magazine back in September, and I will show it to you later. Oh, here it is. This has nothing to do with my talk, but it's a pretty picture, and it has an interesting story behind it, which you can read about if you look at that link that's at the bottom. This picture was taken of the annular eclipse in 2012, and it was taken from Albuquerque by a lady who set up a non-mobile camera, and it just so happened that this kid, she took it over the bluff on the west side of town, and right when the annularity was setting, this kid, she didn't know who it was. He just happened to wander into the frame of the picture and stood right in the middle of the frame of the picture in the exact perfect location, and he was like a mile away. So she just still doesn't know who he is, but I saw this a lot during the before the eclipse last month, 2 months ago. All right, so any questions, any comments? Nobody's got anything to add?
What do you think's been your most successful event that you've run?
Most success, well, we had a total lunar eclipse that we had about 1,500 people show up for. The dollar signs night, like I said, had about 2,000 people. Okay. The total lunar eclipse was free, and the dollar signs night was $1. So those were low-cost events too.
Right.
And Tad was there for several of them.
Would you say that your work-study students have been your greatest asset, or
Why would you
the
ask a
best
question like that?
and greatest assets during your events? How useful have
I
work
would
studies
say
been?
that the planetarium would not function without the work study students, definitely.
Oh, I can't believe that.
Well, I believe it. All right. Anybody else got a question? So I was going to add, so I believe this is the last paper session of the conference?
Yes.
The last delegate paper session of the conference, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Woo! Everybody excited? Okay, I can tell. Or is everybody just so tired from the hospitality suite last night? You're like, yeah. Well, I think this was a great conference. I hope everybody had as much fun and learned as much as I did, because I think it was a great conference. Anna did a great job. I was going to add one more slide to my PowerPoint, but I didn't get it done. That was going to be the slide.
Did anybody have any other questions for Jim or for Carol here too for the Harry Potter talk? Any last minute?
Because
we have
questions for Derek, weren't there? But
oh yeah, I think the other two seem to have split on us.
Okay.
So. Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Next event will be the panel with Mac's old team at 1025 back where breakfast was, so in concourse A through C. Hope to see you all there. Thank you so much for coming, and have a great rest of the conference.